Now the consecration of the church, properly so called, has been completed, and so the bishop will be going into the sacristy to exchange the vestments he's been wearing during the imposition of the relics and the consecration of the altars, to exchange those vestments for those which are proper to the holy sacrifice of the Mass.
And the altar having now been solemnly consecrated, as soon as the bishop departs to vest for Mass, the acolytes and servers will come out and begin to dress the altar for Mass. Candlesticks will be placed on the altar cloths, flowers, and all of the necessary elements for the holy sacrifice of the Mass, which will now follow. So,
et cum spiritu tuo.
The deacon sings, "Let us bless the Lord," and the choir answer, "Thanks be to God." And so now the bishop will prepare for the celebration of Mass in the continuing coverage by the Eternal Word Television Network, EWTN, of the solemn consecration and first Mass celebrated in the Chapel of St. Peter and Paul of Our Lady of Guadalupe Seminary here in Denton, Nebraska, in the Diocese of Lincoln. Celebrated by Bishop Fabian Bruskowitz, Bishop of Lincoln, in the presence of William Cardinal Aveda, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and Cardinal President of the Commission Ecclesia Dei, in charge of all traditional religious communities throughout the world, on behalf of Pope Benedict XVI. As the altar is dressed and the bishop exchanges his vestments, we might mention a few elements that are interesting with regard to the saints whose relics have just been placed in the altar. Of course, those of the Mexican martyrs, their relevance is self-explanatory because they were priests and martyrs who died for the faith and who died for the priesthood. Some of the other saints may be not so familiar to you. St. Catherine was a very learned young woman and was able, by her arguments in favor of the Christian faith, to convert some of the pagans who were sent by the pagan prefect to argue against her. She thus has been made patroness of all philosophers throughout the world, and of course in all seminaries in the Catholic Church. The seminarians study philosophy for at least 2 years, and so they will be invoking her patronage. St. Clement, as a pope, as an early successor of St. Peter, was a great defender of the authority of the Roman Church and wrote a very famous epistle to the church in Corinth, which was enduring some difficulties at the time, in which he reminded them of their responsibility, the responsibility of all Catholics, to accept the authority of the Church with humility, never to set up our own judgment against that of the Church. At the same time, he emphasized the very profound and serious responsibilities which the authority of the Church has in exercising its prerogatives over souls. Saint Apollinaris, as I may have mentioned before, was a very early bishop in the church. Therefore, he had the fullness of the priesthood, and not only that fullness, but it was conferred on him by Saint Peter himself, who consecrated him the first bishop of Ravenna. Saint Lawrence is the patron of cooks, therefore not an unimportant element in a seminary where the seminarians, often like soldiers in an army, travel on their stomachs. He was also a deacon on the step, one of the stages, the last and most important stage on the way to the priesthood. Very important for seminarians to remember and to pray for. When he was being martyred on a gridiron over a slow fire, he prayed for the conversion of the city of Rome, and particularly, he said, because it was the city of Saints Peter and Paul, to whom this new chapel has just been consecrated. Saints Cosmas and Damian were brothers and physicians. They were what we would today call Arabs. They were born in Arabia and studied medicine in Syria and lived in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. So they lived in a lot of places which are now thoroughly Mohammedan in nature and which often present, as we read very sadly in the newspapers, a great threat to the free practice of the one true faith there. Their relics are now in Rome in a basilica dedicated to them. And in our own time, they're certainly saints that we can pray to with great fervor for greater peace between the members of the Church and those who still follow the sect of Mohammedanism. Saint Vincent was also a deacon, like St. Lawrence, but he was in Spain, where he worked particularly closely with his bishop. He used to have to preach on behalf of the bishop because the bishop was suffering from a speech impediment. And even at their trial before the pagan prefect of the Roman government, he had to speak on behalf of the bishop, and did so with such eloquence that he was condemned to a particularly horrifying and prolonged martyrdom. St. Thomas of Canterbury was a great champion of the rights of the Holy Father and the rights of the Church against the creeping secular domination over the Church of the time. This again is something with which we are not unfamiliar in our time, when the Church has had to fight very hard for the rights of the unborn, as well as for the rightful understanding of the sacrament of marriage, and for other elements which sometimes government tends to encroach upon in an inappropriate way in our time. So they become, such saints become very important to us, especially when they have, as St. Thomas of Canterbury did, paid for the truth of what they professed with their very blood.
We have a shot of the Stations of the Cross here. Beautiful stations, which were imported from France. You can actually see the French inscriptions are still there on the stations. Now the candlesticks for the altar are extraordinarily heavy. They weigh almost 100 pounds a piece. So this little device, which you see the seminarians using here, is going to be used to actually get the candlesticks up on the altar. There's a little counterweight inside that thing, so you can actually put those candlesticks up on the altar. It's quite an ingenious little device, which was actually designed and constructed by Father Charles Van Vliet, who was responsible for so many aspects in the construction of the chapel, and who has been working tirelessly over the course of the past 2 years to bring this wonderful work to completion. And there you have the reliquaries, which will be placed on the altar. These are additional saints which will be given special veneration during Mass, and their relics will be placed on the back of the altar in addition to the relics which are sealed inside the altar.
The Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter is a society of apostolic life founded under the authority of the late Holy Father Pope John Paul II in 1988 to spend itself particularly centered on the traditional liturgy of the Church and to minister to those Catholics who are drawn to or attached to that form of the liturgy, which, as I was saying before, Pope Benedict has recently, in a very clear way, noted was never forbidden and was never done away with, although some people perhaps misunderstood it to have been. The priestly fraternity began with a small group of about 10 or a dozen priests. Now, 20 years later, the Fraternity of St. Peter has well over 200 priests and about 140 seminarians studying for the priesthood in the fraternity in its two seminaries, the one whose chapel is being dedicated today here in Denton, Nebraska, and another in Bigratzbad in southern Germany, in Bavaria. The rector of the seminary there in Germany is here today for the ceremony, as are a number of other members of the Fraternity of St. Peter from France, Germany, and Switzerland and England.
I think almost about half of the fraternity is actually
Yes.
represented here today, which is quite an achievement. That's something that
It's very rare that our priests, even in the North American district, which includes Canada, Mexico, and the United States, can get together at any one time, because of course it means they have to leave their churches and chapels for several days in order to do so. But since we knew well in advance when the date of the consecration would be, the priests of the district have made every effort to join together, and so it's one of the few times really that so many members of the district can get together on their own and also spend some time with some of their confreres from Europe.
we also have very, very blessed with the presence of a number of our longtime supporters of the fraternity and the episcopacy, particularly Bishop Brzkovitz, of course, who is performing the consecration ceremony, but also we have in attendance Bishop James Timlin, who is the Bishop Emeritus of the Diocese of Scranton. Bishop Timlin was the very first bishop in the United States to invite the fraternity into his diocese, and also as a result of his beneficence, we were given the building which we currently have as our district headquarters, which is located in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So it was a great honor to have Bishop Timlin with us here today on this momentous occasion. He was one of our very first benefactors and has been a constant and extremely generous supporter of our work here in the United States.
We also have Bishop Slattery of Oklahoma, who generously hosts one of our apostolates in his diocese, and Bishop Finn from Missouri, who has a community of traditional Benedictine oblates in his diocese as well. You can see here, straight ahead of you in the picture, the altar of Our Lady, which is one of the principal side altars of the chapel, as the high altar is being dressed for Holy Mass. The rondelles in the altar